Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to do the TicTacToe project. It's not a very big project, but it'll get you used to writing if statements and expressions and all that stuff that we're going to need later on. So just open up Visual Studio and go to the New Project option on the side here and just select New Project. And Visual Studio will think for a little bit, and it'll open up some templates for us. And what we want to do is create a Windows Forms application. So that's the type of interface, or the type of project that has that nice drag and drop interface on it that we can use to build a GUI. So I'm going to change my project name to TicTacToe. And it's very important to give your project a good name. If you leave it as Windows Form Application 12 or something like that, when I go to look for projects and grade them, I am not going to be able to find it. So it is very important that your project have a good name, and then also just double check that the location of your project is out on your X drive and not on your Z drive. Again, if it's not on the X drive, I'm not going to be able to find it. So just click OK, and Visual Studio will think for a bit here, and it's going to create our new project for us. And it's still thinking. Okay, there we go. So there is our here's our project, and you normally see the Solution Explorer here, and the Properties window is kind of down at the bottom. If you're missing a window, you lose your window, you can always get those back from the View menu right here. So if I say View Solution Explorer, there's my Solution Explorer, and these windows are all dockable, so I can. There we go. You can dock that up there, and that's kind of the standard layout, is your code up here and your properties down here. So let's just go to our form here and change the name of our form. Form 1 is kind of a, that's not very descriptive. Let's give it a good name, TicTacToe. I don't even, does TicTacToe have an E on the end? I think it does. There we go. So notice that the title bar on our form has changed. So we've changed the text property on our form, and now we see that what that's done up there. So now let's build our interface, and what we're going to do is we're going to use buttons for the letters or the spaces on the grid that the player can click on. So let's bring up our toolbox, which is under the View menu, View, Toolbox, and their button is right there, but if you didn't see the button control, you could just type it in and you'd see it pop up. So let's go drag a button control onto our form, and now let's go configure this button to look a little bit different, so it'll be nice and big. So let's go change the size property of the button to 100 by 100. And now see that button is now a nice big square. And I'll explain why we do this in a second. Let's also change the font on the button, or the font size, to be much bigger than it is. So right now, if we find the font property, we can see that it's set to 8.25. Let's open that up. If you double click on the little dots next to it, you'll see some options here. We can scroll down, we can change the font, we can make it much bigger. So let's make it 72 point, like that. There we go. Okay. So we can see now that what we're going to do, we're going to have an X or an O in that button. And if you scroll down, we'll change the name of the button there, the text on the button, to blank. There we go. So now we have an empty string in the text property for that button. So the reason for doing this is we're going to be a little bit tricky, or we're going to be sneaky about how we do this. Normally, if you were making a game like TicTacToe, which relies on a grid, a 3x3 grid, we would need a data structure, some sort of 3x3 grid data structure, to store the state of each box. However, if we use a text box, or if we use a button, we can use the text property in the button to actually store the character that's in that box. So we're kind of getting a 2-for-1 there, or we're using the buttons themselves as the data structure to store the state of the game. So that will make our code a little bit more streamlined. So now I'm going to take this button here and I'm just going to copy and paste it 8 more times. It's important the order that we do this in order for the when we go to check to see who's won, it's gonna it's important. In order for that to work properly, we have to make sure that we have our buttons in the right order. So I'm going to copy this button and I'm going to say Control V to paste it, and I'm just going to drop it there. And I'm going to. So it's important that you go in this particular order. So you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is just kind of resize the form there. And I can put a reset button on here too. So let's drag another button on there, and we'll call it. I'm going to rename the text on that button. I'm going to call it reset. And I'm going to change the name of this particular button too. I'm going to go up to its name property, and I'm going to call it reset button. So the name property of a control is becomes the name of the variable in the code that we use to refer to that control. So if I want to refer to this button in the code, I can refer to it as reset button. These other buttons, they have the names that were given to them by default. So if I want to do anything with this button, I can refer to it using button 1 because that's the name of that control. All right, so now I'll just double click on the reset button there, and it's going to create the function for me that responds to the reset button being clicked. Okay, so I'm just going to pop over to Google Docs here real fast, just make sure that I'm not too far off the page. Okay, so we set the text property to nothing. Yeah, we're good. We're good. We're good. That's the order you want to put things in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Going in that order. We've got our reset button. We changed our name. Okay, so our form looks like that. Okay, so now what we want to do is go put some code into our form that allows us to keep track of the state of the game. So I'm going to just zoom in on my code a little bit so you can see what's going on. So inside the form1 class, right? So remember, in a project, everything, think of the namespace as being your project. So the namespace starts here and it ends here. And inside the namespace, we're going to have classes. We can see there's a class starting here, and it goes down to the closing matching curly brace. So that's a class right there. And then that class, which is kind of the definition for an object, well, it contains functions. And here's one function, and there's another function. So if we want to put some variables where all the functions can see them, we put them inside the class. So then they belong to that class. Every copy of that object will have those variables. So let's define some constants. So it can for whose turn it is. So we can have const int player1 equals 0, const int player2 equals 1, right? So all I'm doing is just defining some constants to say whose turn it is. Is it player 1's turn or is it player 2's turn? And then I also want an integer to say whose turn it actually is. So let's say who wants. Let's say player. It always starts off as player 1's turn, right? So there we go. So these two variables define. They're kind of just synonyms. So what I can, instead of typing in 0 and 1, I can type in player 1 and player 2 to keep track of whose turn it is. And then I'm storing whose turn it actually is in turn. So turn is a variable, right? Because it's not constant. These guys are constant. I can't change them. These are macros, right? And then I'm just going to keep track of whose turn it is with this turn variable. So let's make a function now. Let's add a function to this class that handles a button being clicked. So I'm just going to give myself some space in my code here, and I'm going to make a function. Now functions, they can take parameters and they can return values, but they don't have to. So if a function doesn't return a value, its return type is void. Void just means nothing. It doesn't give you anything back. There's no output from this function. The function just does some work, and that's it. And let's call it click button. That's a good name for this function. And it's going to take a button as a parameter. So it's going the parameter that gets the input it gets is going to be the button to click, and I'll just call it B for button. That'd be fairly easy to remember. I don't know. We could call it BTN or something like that. Generally, you want to give your variables descriptive names. However, the fact that we can see that this is the object B is of type button, right? That's its type. That's the type of parameter it accepts. Then it's pretty obvious what this thing is. So if you're wondering again, like what does this mean? This is a function named clickButton. It returns nothing, and it takes as its input a button object that we will refer to within the function using the name B. All right, so if we click on a button, we probably want to check that that button hasn't already been clicked on, right? So we can use an if statement for that. And remember, the syntax for an if statement is the word if, and then the parentheses, and then the curly braces to define the body of the if statement. I'll zoom in a little bit more here. There we go. All right. So if the condition or expression between the parentheses is true, then the body of the loops, or the body of the if statement will be run. So if we only want to do stuff to the button if the button's text is blank. So we can check the text of the button that we're being given with the dot operator. We can go and use the dot operator, which is like the apostrophe S, and we saw this in the text adventure stuff. We saw the dot operator in Game Maker. So if B's text property is equal to nothing, right? If it's an empty string, well, that means the button hasn't been clicked on, and now we want to do the body of the loop. And now we need to check whose turn it is, right? So we can say if the turn is equal to player 1. So if it's player 1's turn, now let's put an X in the text box. So we'll set the text property of button B to X, capital X. And if it's not player 1's turn, which means otherwise or else, put an O in the box. There we go. So if we run this and we click, and well, nothing's going to happen right now because we're not calling this function anywhere. Just because you've written a function doesn't mean it's ever going to get run. To run a function, you have to call it, which calling means jump to that function and run it. So let's think about what else has to happen here. After we're going to need a function. I should have done this a little bit earlier. We're going to need a function called check for win, and that's going to determine if somebody's won. And that's going to be a void function too. And check for win. There we go. It does not take any parameters. There you go. Now we'll go and we'll fix this later. We'll implement it later, but we just need to have it right now as a placeholder. So after we put somebody flips over a picture box or puts an X or an O in a square, we want to check for win. So now we're going to call that function. So to call a function, you just use the name of the function, and then you specify the inputs to the function. And if the function, and those inputs go inside the parentheses, and if there's no inputs to the function, you have an empty parameter list. That open and close parentheses is it's an empty parameter list. So we're just making a function call, but not passing any arguments in, because the function doesn't take any arguments. And then we want to switch turns. So how do we switch turns? Well, if it's player 1's turn, now it's player 2's turn. Oh, you know, we could actually do this up here. We could have done that inside that if statement, but that would also kind of mess up our checking for wins. I don't know. We could do it up here. No. I don't know. Sorry. There's a million ways to write anything. So I'm gonna copy this kind of construct down here, and now I'll say if it's player 1's turn, now the turn is player 2. Right? It's player 2's turn. Now, why do I have 2 equal signs there and 1 equal sign there? 2 equal signs means comparing. When you're comparing things, you use 2 equal signs. When you're assigning or setting the value of something, you use 1 equal sign. So if it's not player 2's turn, now it must be player 1's turn. Right, so there's only 2 possible things that can happen. So if it's player 1's turn, now it's player 2's turn. Otherwise, it must have been player 2's turn, and now it's player 1's turn. So there we go. There's our, oops, let me zoom out a little bit. There we go. And can we get that whole function on the page? Almost. There we go. So there's our click button function, right? It takes a button as its input. We check the text. Is the text blank? If it's player 1's turn, we put an X in there. Otherwise, we put an O in there. Then we see if somebody won, and then we flip the turn. We change whose turn it is. All right, and that's it. And notice we've got our curly braces all matched up. If your code gets ugly, you can go to Edit, Advanced, and Format Document, and then Visual Studio will fix all your code indentation for you. All right, so there's our function that clicks on a picture box. So now what I'm going to do is call this function, right? So just because I have this click button function doesn't mean it's ever getting used. So what I need to do is click on my buttons. So I'm just going to double click on all of my buttons here. And this is the function for button 1. So what I'm going to do is call the click button function. I'm going to pass in button 1. So now when the button is clicked, I'm going to say click button, and I'm going to say, by the way, here's the button that I want you to click on, and then button 1 will become the input to this function, and when I'm referring to B, I'm actually referring to button 1, the parameter that was passed in. So let's run this and just see if it works. And it might take a second to pop up here. And wow, it's popping up. So what you're going to want to do is copy and paste, or you're going to want to click on all 9 of your buttons. There you go, right? So I clicked X and I put an X in the box. So actually, well, you know what? Here, just to illustrate what's going on, let me put a breakpoint here. I'm going to hit F9 to put a breakpoint there, and run this. And now if I click on a button, you'll see the program stops here, and this is the button 1 click function. Now I'm going to call the click button function, and button 1 will become the parameter. So let me step into the function here I'm hitting F11. So now inside of this function, this button that I'm referring to as B is actually button 1, right? So if I look through all the properties of this B object, I would see that the name of the button was actually button 1, right? So is the button blank? Yes. Whose turn is it? Is it player 1's turn? Is that statement true? Yes. So put an X in the box, then call the check for win function, and now flip the turn, right? So now it's player 2's turn, and now we're done, right? So all right, there we go. Now let's you want to do that for the rest of your buttons. And so for button 2, right, you're going to pass in button 2 as the parameter. And button 3, you're going to want to paste in, same thing, button 3. And just keep doing that. And button 4, apologize for the redundancy here. And what happened to my form designer? Okay, if you lose your form and you can right click on your on form1.cs, and you can go to view designer. That will bring back your code window. You can every now and then you click on the wrong thing by default or something, and oh, where'd my designer go? View designer. Why can't I dock that? That's really annoying. Let me dock that up there. There we go. 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go. So when I click on the 9th button, I'm going to pass button 9 as the parameter, and then button 9 will become the button that is being scrutinized here and manipulated. So let's go. It sounds so sadistic and evil, doesn't it? Well, I don't know. I'm just playing tic-tac-toe. All right, so now I should be able to, I'm going to clear that breakpoint and keep running. Cool. All right. Notice it didn't check the wins. We'll do that in another video. This one's getting kind of long. All right, last thing though, how about the reset function? Let's just go do that. So the moral of the story is I could have put this code in all 9 button functions, but that would be horrible. So that's the whole point of writing functions, is to consolidate functionality in one place where it becomes reusable. And if you find yourself copying and pasting the same code all over the place, you should probably take that code and put it inside of a function. All right, so last thing would be the reset function. Where's our reset button? Okay. This is just no easy way to do this without using techniques that we haven't talked about yet. What we want to do is go set the text properties on all the buttons back to blank. All right, there's just no sophisticated way to do this that wouldn't involve techniques that we haven't discussed yet. But yes, you could actually, the slick way to do this is you can ask the form. Right now we're in an object called form1. We can ask it, we can look up controls by name, and because we are using a specific naming convention for all our controls, we could look them up by name and do this in a loop, and it would be a little more elegant. But that's, you know, what did that take us? Like 30 seconds to do. So all we want to do is just reset the text properties in the button. I don't know. Maybe we want to set turn back to player one, something like that. Now it's player one's turn. So now if I boom, there we go. Cool. All right, so I'm going to stop that video. In the last video, or the next one, what we're going to do is we're going to go implement this check for win function, and we're going to use that to check, are there any three in a row patterns that are being stored in the text properties of our buttons. So that should at least help you get your interface going. And then in the next video, I'll show you how to do the check for win function.